If ye would feel the pulse of humankind, Duncan McCallum's Scottish grandfather once declared, just look to a busy harbour. From his perch in the church tower overlooking the forest of masts in Boston Harbour, Duncan indeed felt as if he were glimpsing the pulsing heart of the colony. In quick succession he pointed to 3 of the nearest vessels. "Brig from Jamaica with a cargo of rum," the square-shouldered youth beside him eagerly answered. "Next a fast bark just arrived from Liverpool with cordage and Dutch porcelain, and that filthy one with the wide beam, she's a banker fresh from the cod beds off the Newfoundland." Henry Knox was slow of body, but his mind was more agile than that of any 18-year-old Duncan had ever known, and he enthusiastically embraced Duncan's lessons about the architecture of visiting ships and the unique nature of each of the ports they called home. "Curaçao, Lisbon, Portsmouth, Recife, and Santo Domingo," Knox continued, pointing to ships farther out in the harbour before turning back to Duncan. "And I've heard that new cutter just arrived from Halifax carries a dozen 12-pounders and a brass chase gun." Duncan smiled. The youth was obsessed with all things military, and on the nights when they climbed the higher steeple of the Old North Church to watch the stars, he often begged Duncan to describe his experiences in the last war with the French. Duncan glanced back at the small device Knox had strapped to the back rail of the narrow walkway that surrounded the tower of King's Chapel. "I need my lens," he reminded the youth as Knox stepped toward the contraption. "Pray, just a few more moments," the teenage scholar exclaimed, motioning to a pinpoint of light, sharply focused by the lens mounted above the rail, as it traversed the tin tray below the lens. As Duncan watched, the glowing dot of light reached a small mound of gunpowder, which abruptly crackled, then exploded with a small cough of smoke. "The zenith!" the youth declared triumphantly, pointing to the sun overhead, then toward the fortress on Castle Island. An instant later the noon gun from the fort echoed across the harbour. Duncan extended an impatient hand, and Knox slipped the lens out of its harness and hurried back around the tower. "Prithee, Duncan, may I?" he asked, nodding to the telescope in Duncan's hands. Duncan hesitantly surrendered the instrument. Knox quickly reinserted the lens into the telescope and screwed the end cap back in place, then shook his long brown hair from his face to better examine the leather-bound tube in his hands, pausing over the inscription on the brass plate that adorned it. "With gratitude for services nobly performed, your servant, John Hancock," Knox read, and looked up wide-eyed. "They say Mr. Hancock will soon be the richest merchant in all of New England," the youth declared, then furrowed his brow as he read the inscription again and looked up with a mischievous grin. "It's like what a general would present to his favourite spy," he suggested. "Did you purloin a letter from the king's boudoir?" Duncan cocked his head a moment, wondering if Knox had indeed pierced one of the many secrets he kept with Hancock. "Nothing so romantic, Henry," he explained. "The master of his trading sloop bound for Bermuda had a seizure the day before sailing. I was able to fill in." Something icy touched his heart as he spoke, and he turned toward the harbour to avoid further questions. The price he had paid for making the 7-week voyage out of American waters had been almost too painful to bear. He raised the telescope to his eye and aimed it toward the northeast. "You said that burning ship went down past Shirley Point?" he asked the youth. Duncan had been on a wharf with his old friend Conewago, studying the luminescent jellyfish arriving on the spring tide, when a peal of thunder had rolled out of the clear starlit sky, followed by a flicker of flames. Fire was the nightmare of every mariner. Duncan had watched with dread in his heart as he saw the furled sails on 2 square-rigged masts ignite into flame. No ship could have survived such an intense explosion and the subsequent inferno, and the frigid, ripping currents off the point would have dealt cruelly with any survivors. "Have they named her yet?" Duncan asked. When Knox wasn't present at the bookstore where he had met Duncan, he was